Today we're going to start our look at U.S. History Chapter 16, Postwar America. And we start in Section 1, looking at the Eisenhower Era. The main idea is that the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower was shaped in large part by the Cold War and related conflicts. Our learning objectives are to describe the circumstances of Eisenhower's election in 1952, to explain how the Cold War affected the Eisenhower administration, and to list and explain the Cold War hotspots during the 1950s. So we start by looking at the election of 1952. The 22nd Amendment set a 10-year limit on the number of years that a president could serve. Truman was specifically excluded from the limit. Still, he felt he had served long enough and did not seek re-election in 1952. So the Democrats nominated Adlai Stevenson. The Republicans chose Dwight D. Eisenhower, known as Ike. His campaign hit a snag when his vice presidential running mate, Richard M. Nixon, was accused of being dishonest. Eisenhower won on his campaign promise to end the war in Korea. So looking at Dwight D. Eisenhower, Eisenhower was the 34th President of the United States. He was in office from January 20th, 1953 until January 20th, 1961. His vice president was Richard Nixon, and he was preceded by Harry S. Truman and succeeded by John F. Kennedy. Ike was a five-star general and a war hero. He had been the supreme Allied commander of Europe and had planned and supervised the D-Day invasion of the beaches of Normandy. Now, as we mentioned, going into the election, one snag was that Richard Nixon was accused of being dishonest. So this brings us now to Richard Nixon and the Checkers speech. Eisenhower chose California Senator Richard Milhouse Nixon as his vice presidential running mate. Nixon had made a name as a strong anti-communist, and during the 1952 campaign, Nixon was accused of having an $18,000 fund made up of gifts from political supporters. This was not illegal, but Nixon's accusers said he was dishonest. Nixon went on television to defend his actions and claimed that he did not use the fund improperly and that he had only accepted one special gift in 1952, a Cocker Spaniel dog named Checkers. His outstanding performance saved his spot on the Republican ticket.
Next President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
When television first covered political conventions, the hidden world of politics was suddenly transformed into a national spectacle. It was theater and history, unfolding before the viewer's eyes.
It was drama all the way. You saw those platform fights, and you saw the dealing and the wheeling for delegates right in front of you live.
At the Republican Convention of 1952, Dwight Eisenhower ran the first made-for-TV campaign, with stars like Clark Gable in the spotlight.
Who has written the songs that all America loves to sing.
Eisenhower's supporters were enthusiastic and dynamic. His opponent, Robert Taft, an old-school politician, was convinced he could win by the old rules of backroom maneuverings.
The Taft people, who controlled both the Credentials Committee and the National Committee itself, decided to keep television away. They allowed reporters in, but not television cameras. And so television kept showing a picture of a closed door, and the symbol of the closed door became unbearable.
Senator Robert Taft made the fatal error of trying to seize control of the convention with the cameras rolling.
A steal was taking place, even if they didn't call it that. The public recognized, and the politicians recognized, and they also recognized that they couldn't go along anymore with closed door, back room, smoky room, getting the presidential nomination set in order so they could take it to the delegates. The whole public became aware of it.
The party organizers and backroom boys were being pushed aside by the television advisors.
I guess maybe it was there in '52 that you had to understand that a politician had to take command of the screen if he's going to get elected president, if he's going to persuade the country.
At the convention, Richard Nixon was Eisenhower's vice presidential candidate. He would use television to save his career. There were a number of newspaper stories that suggested that Nixon was involved in a scandal of receiving gifts from unnamed financial backers. There was talk that he would be dropped from the ticket.
My fellow Americans, I come before you tonight as a candidate for the vice presidency.
Nixon believed that the only way to put the scandal to rest was to talk directly to the American people in a television and radio address, go right over the heads of the newspaper reporters.
We did get something, a gift, after the election. You know what it was? It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog in a crate that he'd sent all the way from Texas. Black and white, spotted.
Nixon portrayed himself as the decent citizen who was standing up to his faceless enemies.
And our little girl, Tricia, the 6-year-old, named it Checkers. And you know, the kids, like all kids, love the dog. And I just want to say this right now, that regardless of what they say about it, we're going to keep it.
It was terribly corny, but it worked. It was mawkish, but he pulled all the stops out, and it was a very clever performance. Television saved him. Had it not been for that checkered speech, I think he would have gone down the drain. We might never have heard from Nixon again.
Television was more effective as an image-making tool than as an instrument to reform politics.
We dreamed, for example, that only the best candidates would rise to the surface because the public would be able to see through the charlatans, and they'd be able to expose the candidate for, warts and everything. We dreamed that sloganeering and any kind of falsity in advertising would be eliminated, but it didn't come off that way.
Now looking at the Cold War and the Eisenhower administration. Eisenhower kept his campaign promise and traveled to Korea to try to get the stalled peace talks moving. And even after the peace was achieved in 1953, the Cold War continued to rage and dominate Eisenhower's presidency. U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles helped to shape Eisenhower's Cold War policies. Changes of leadership in the Soviet Union and developments in their foreign policy helped keep Cold War tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union at an all-time high. John Foster Dulles was critical of the Democrats' foreign policy. He did not want to merely contain communism, but he wanted to roll it back. Dulles believed in brinksmanship, the diplomatic art of going to the brink of war without actually getting into war. To this end, he advocated building more nuclear weapons. Now looking at changes in leadership in the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin died in March of 1953. His death caused Americans to wonder what policies his successor would enact. Nikita Khrushchev emerged as the new leader. The Soviet Union remained a communist dictatorship, although Nikita Khrushchev certainly was not as tyrannical as Stalin. The Warsaw Pact. The Soviets created the Warsaw Pact in 1955, which was a military alliance with the Soviet-dominated countries of Eastern Europe. Uprisings in Poland and Hungary were ruthlessly suppressed, and the Soviets made it clear that they were in control of Eastern Europe. Now looking at U.S. and Soviet relations, with the Geneva Summit and the Open Skies Treaty. Americans and Soviets met in Geneva, Switzerland for a summit meeting, which is a high-level diplomatic meeting. Eisenhower proposed an Open Skies Treaty that would allow each side to fly over the other's territory to learn more about its military abilities. The Soviets rejected the proposal, and this leads us to the U-2 spy plane incident. Eisenhower wanted to gain information about the Soviet military. So, in 1960, the Soviets shot down an American U-2 spy plane sent into the Soviet Union to inspect their military facilities. Now, of course, this was in violation of the fact that the Soviets had rejected Eisenhower's proposal of an open skies treaty, and this incident greatly damaged U.S.-Soviet relations. The pilot involved was Francis Gary Powers, and eventually we did negotiate his safe return, but nonetheless, like I said, that trust was further damaged as a result of this incident.
I looked up, looked out, and just everything was orange. Everywhere, I don't know whether it was a reflection in the canopy itself or just the whole sky. And I felt a push, an acceleration, just as if someone had put their hand on the plane and given it a shove forward. That set me back in the seat a little bit. And I can remember saying to myself, my God, I've had it now.
Was my granddad a hero?
Well, I consider him a hero because...
Francis Gary Powers III, Trey, is asking his father the same thing it took the United States government 40 years to decide, about a young American pilot who became the key figure in the Cold War's most infamous spy case.
Overnight, this very sort of ordinary guy, never had expected to be a part of extraordinary events, became a worldwide figure.
Powers grew up poor, the son of a coal miner in southwest Virginia, but through intelligence and native abilities became one of America's best pilots in one of America's most secret planes, the high-flying U-2, thought to be beyond Soviet reach.
I knew I couldn't get to the struck switch, and I decided, well, since there's no need to sit here and struggle and try to do it, I've just got to now save myself.
A Soviet SAM missile brought him down. He was captured, interrogated, tried, imprisoned, and finally exchanged for a Soviet spy. But his return home was bittersweet. Some in the CIA thought he should have taken his standard issue poisoned pin, hidden in a silver dollar.
The fact that he didn't use it became a big part of why Powers came home and was treated shabbily by the CIA and by the U.S. government, really treatment that did not cease until after his death, when he was cleared and essentially exonerated of any wrongdoing.
In 1960, nuclear war seemed close at hand. Powers' mission seemed a reasonable risk that resulted in one of America's most embarrassing moments.
It was a very controversial incident. American president was caught lying. Our enemy was given the upper hand. Khrushchev ended up banging his shoe at the UN.
Back when Dad came home, he was debriefed by the CIA.
Bring your kids or your grandkids, especially if you lived through this era and you remember air raid drills and going under your desk because of danger of being subject to an attack by Soviet bombers at any point. If you remember those times, you owe it to your children to share it with them, your grandchildren to share it with them. Because, of course, we live in perilous times today, but there's a different kind of peril. The enemy is a much more hard-to-determine one. And there is some value, I think, in reminding people who did not live through the Cold War of what exactly the stakes seemed to be at the time. That the stakes were not just potential attack. The stakes were potentially mutually assured destruction. The end of life on the planet as we knew it.
40 years after the fact, Francis Gary Powers was posthumously awarded the POW Medal, the National Defense Medal, and the CIA Director's Medal for extraordinary fidelity and essential service for his military service and for never disclosing any classified information. On the 50th anniversary of the day he was shot down, Francis Gary Powers' exhibit is on display at the Virginia Historical Society. And his son, Gary Jr., is now working on a permanent home for the collection.